Alright, yeah, it's recording. What we're doing today, just going to have a look at, as you can see, brief structures, gutters, cuts, holes, and a number of others. Now, I use some of these terms interchangeably, so gutters often refer to gutters and troughs. They basically mean the same thing. Cuts, entries, exits, I might use those terms interchangeably as well. The rest of them stay the same. Now, I've done a similar video where we did it at a beach. Because I didn't have a structure there, I didn't feel that it was as informative as it should have been. So I'm doing this one up. Hopefully this will be a bit more helpful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out even more structures that are important. And more importantly, how they relate to fishing and your chances of success. Now, before we go in, not all fishing structures or beach structures are the same, and often you'll need a combination of the numbers that we point out here to produce fish. Now, these are some of the things that we'll be looking at today. Intro to what we mean by beach structures, not as in structures like wharfs, and well, they can be, but more what's presented by the actual environment itself. But this is how they work, a more in-depth look at it, the importance of it, how to spot them. Those are all what we're looking at. Now, not all beaches are going to contain these sort of structures, and as we discuss, you might only see one or two, one type of one, or none at all. I'll even show you a beach, I think later in the slides, as an example of a beach where it's pretty much where you see nothing from shoreline to shoreline, it's just waves lapping up on the shore. So it's not always going to be that they create something, but and neither do they mean that structure, that place isn't going to produce fish. It just means you're less likely to find them, or less likely to find fish. They're not going to just walk up and down the shore looking for you. And there's a saying that 90% of the fish are only in like 10% of the location on the beaches. So you really want to increase your chances by looking for whatever you can. Now, I think there was I can't remember where I saw this or read this, but fish will congregate around beaches as opposed to featureless portions. So even the hard to see stuff we'll be looking at, like holes or submerged points, slips or reps. They'll congregate around something. I think I saw a diagram where if you say place 3 fish in a big giant bucket and leave them in there swimming around, and then you drop a copper coin in them, the fish will tend to congregate around that. Even though it's a barrenless environment, will congregate around something that is different. It's just in their nature. So that's why that's why they're important to focus on, because they are drawn to features and are drawn to certain areas. And as we'll go through, some of these features will draw more in, and they'll draw more in for certain reasons. So that's why they're so important. So we're going to be looking at, like I said, the intro, waves and wave actions, what they mean. And I didn't cover this in my previous one, but this is really important. And understanding what the different types of waves are can really make a huge impact on how you identify what's underneath. I won't go too much more into that one because the next slide pretty much covers that. Sandbars and how to identify them and why they're useful. And gutters / troughs. Obviously, how to spot the importance, cuts or exits and entries, spotting and importance, holes, what they are, the identification and the fishing potential of those, water points or submerged points, lips and rips explain, and the relevance to fishing. So the intro. So beach structures are anything that's related to your fishing and how to identify them. because as I mentioned before, then they're drawn to features. Okay, and as I stated in the original portion, not all are created equal, and you often need combinations to attract your fish. They're not all just going to just float around out in there along the shoreline that has nothing there for them. They'll come for some sort of reason. Okay, some of these will include things like the sandbar, your gutter, your cut, or your entry exit points, holes, submerged points, and so forth. And some beaches, like I mentioned, will not have any structures. There could be, like, you could look at a shoreline and from either side just see waves lapping up on shore, and more than likely you're going to have a less chance of catching anything. You'll often find, maybe when you've walked up to a beach and you see people fishing, you might notice that someone in one location seems to be catching a lot of fish, and people, to the left and right don't seem to be having any luck. There'll be a particular reason for that. It's not just because this guy's doing something special. It's usually just because he's found that particular point or that particular structure and is fishing that point, and that's why, or that spot, sorry. So that's why it's important to note these sort of things, and it's important to, if we know what they are, you know how to spot them, it'll increase your chance that you're going to actually catch something and be more successful. Now, waves and wave action, these are actually rather important features, and because as we go through, I'll mention different types of waves when I say like a breaker or a surging wave, plunging, spilling, collapsing, so forth. I'll be mentioning these terms, so I thought it's important to highlight some of these before I go in, because rather than you having to look up and go, what does he mean by a breaking wave or anything like that? It's important to see what they are, to be able to identify them yourself as well. So the main ones we'll be interested in are breaking waves, spillings, plunging, surging, or collapsing. Now, I'm not going to go through into too much about waves themselves and all of it, because there's a lot more than the ones I've listed here, and there's a lot more to waves than all that. I'm not going to go through into why the waves are there and all, as far as the concept of waves. We are going to go into why waves are there to an extent, but more into the importance they have on spotting features and the importance to fishing, because essentially what happens on the top of the surface is a reflection on what's actually happening underlying on your beach floor, and that's what's critical for us, that we need to target places, and the best way to target those is by seeing what's happening. If you can't look, for example, at low tide to be able to clearly identify certain certain features, having these waves are examples that we can look to and go, this is a wave that's doing, like, have a look here, like, for example, you can see this nice, I'll just jump to the next page 1 second, because I think here's a few more that actually go through the point I'm about to bring up. I'm just going to see, yep, I haven't missed anything there. These are a few things I'm going to bring up. Like, for example, if we got a plunging wave or a breaking wave, so we have here, see how we have this sort of wave where it is coming up just like, really, what you're looking for is, if you're a surfer, this nice big wave where it's coming up, it's looping over before it sort of collapses down on itself, and then, slows off down into either the edge of the beach or into more water. Now, the reason why this happens is because the underneath of the beach is too low to support the energy and the wave above it, and so brings up the height of the water, and thus creating the wave. And then what happens is it then continues to draw energy and grow in height, depending upon how low the sand is or reef is underneath that, and whether or not it comes up slowly or comes up quickly. So if you've got a really short distance between, say, the sand or the reef and the overall height of the water above it, you're going to get a really high wave above it. So if you've got small waves, small break waves that come across, then you're going to have more depth between the sand and the water above. So if you've got a nice, we'll have an examples as we go through a bit more, and I've got a video I'll show you where you can actually see the waves form. If you've got really high, nice, big plunging waves that come in as the ocean comes across, like this example, the ocean comes across and then all of a sudden it's steeper, it'll form these nice, big plunging waves. Spilling is then when it comes back onto itself, like this one. So that's a nice plunging wave, what the surfers are looking for. Spillings, there's not a lot of height, so it sort of just spills over onto itself, sort of sends this, this white sort of, there's another example, sort of white sort of wave where it's not a lot of height and it sort of just crashes straight over onto itself. These are your plunging ones where you got that big height, where your surfers like come through the middle here and they do that. And then you got the surging ones, which are, these are another example over here, say where you got a deep sea floor and pretty much just the action of the wave just crashes into the side of the beach or the shore. Like this one, you've got man-made object out here. Another example, you'll often see surging ones when you come closer to shore. Now, the importance of spotting these is that they help identify a few features that are important, i.e. the sandbar, which is the next thing we'll look at, and the gutter or your trough, which is another important thing. So when we combine these together, we're looking at those sort of the waves as they come in, because if it's coming in from a deep ocean, you're doing a nice sandbar. Here we go, we've got some more examples. I can't remember how many I put here, so excuse me. Here we go, some more where you have a flatter bottom. There's not as many. This is the type of wave you're going to get. Steeper bottom from the deeper water too, where the wave and the water interact, or the bottom of the contour of the shore interact, and you get to pick a wave where it actually spills and breaks hard, and they're very different from the huge plunging style, or this is another version when you're hitting straight onto rock where there's nothing else but deeper shore or deep ocean, and straight into say massive rock fishing or rock formations or even man-made formations. So some of these examples will help illustrate sort of what you're looking at. So you can tell, the importance is to tell the difference from the wave on the top to what happens to what's happening underneath. And if you can have a good understanding of these examples, then it helps us lead into the next part, which is things like sandbars or reefs, to understand that perhaps what we're seeing on the top gives us an idea of what's underneath, which gives us an idea of what might be around as far as the structures involved for fishing, and so we can find the best place to do our fishing. So as this one I've put here, your plunging tells us the depth of the water. It's suddenly dropping off, which increases the energy of a wave. So it grows in height before it breaks, and then that wave height, as it mentions, gives you an idea of how shallow or deep the water is. So it's sort of like sort of like a little bit of a, but can't remember the right term now, it's just gone off the top of my head. But a bit of a rule of length to what you can see on the top, what you can see on the bottom. So when we go into reading a beach itself, when we look at it, we go to assess from this. So we're looking at a beach, just a picture of a beach I pulled off to see whether or not what we can see here is if we're going to get anything from this. So as we said, not all are the same, and finding beaches are important because that's where you're more likely to find pictures. So the reason why we've grabbed this picture off is that it's a great example of including a number of things, which is a sandbar trough or a gutter. So you can see, even though it's not zoomed in, this is what we'd have a nice plunging breaker out here. Now, and just a bit beyond that, you can see it's a deeper sea. So what's happening here is that these waves are hitting, or the wave energy is hitting a sandbar, so it's causing the energy and the rise of the height of the sea to increase dramatically, causing these plunging breakers that happen across the top here. And then all of a sudden, as they hit the edge of the trough, they drop off suddenly. So you get this spilling breaker pretty much straight afterwards, and then all of a sudden it takes away the wave energy, as you can see in this section in here, where it's that deeper colour, and also there's limited wave action coming across. So you know that there's a structure out here that's causing the waves to rise in height quickly, cause these plunging style breakers, as you can see over here. You can actually see it forming, and then it crashes off quickly, dispersing most of the wave action until it finally hits the shore, causing those surging little breakers that hits the lip of the beach. So when we're looking for breaking waves, you're looking at the wave height, the energy as it goes forward, the type of wave, and also the lack thereof as to being what structure you're looking at. So this is a good picture and a good example of saying, okay, now I can see what I'm looking at, why these waves are important, and because they go over this sand break, it stirs up that sand, helps carry the bait and the feed through the area that's just in front of your gutter, into the fish that would be waiting, that would sort of be circling around between the back end of the sandbar and the front end to the lip of the actual beach. So you don't need to find these sort of structures far out. These are often can be quite close into where you're actually standing on the beach. Your trough could drop off. I think there's a picture coming up shortly which will show some more examples of that. So sandbar here, they are really important when it comes to us finding places to fish, and they're easy to spot by the wave action or at low tide. Now this is a picture from low tide. Now, so high tide would be up here where this mark sits. So this is at low tide, and this would be the sandbar that's sitting in the middle. So if we go back to the previous picture, so at low tide, this section here that's all white at the moment would be this section here where this sand sits. So as a wave comes in, that'll form the plunging break and it'll lead into this area that sits in between, which would form your gutter. So viewing them at low tide is great. If you can get down and see your beach at low tide, you're going to see those structures that aren't going to be easily viewable at high tide unless you're good at, unless you can read those waveforms. But if you can see it at low tide, it makes the job of identifying them even easier. And as I mentioned, those waves are important to churn up those areas, expose the food and carry them into the gutter. So the height, the disturbance of the wash afterwards, reforming and the remaining energy of the wave itself, so whether it crashes into and just keeps going, so whether it crashes down, and if it continues to form another waves as we come in, like more waves, then you know the gutter isn't deep. If it plunges straight off and you get this tiny bit of surging wave action that drops off very quickly, then you know it's nice and deep, and that means that you're going to have more chance of success in that area. If it's shallow, then there's less chance there's going to be fish in there. Still might not mean that you don't bother fishing there, it's just that a deeper cut is better than a shallow one. Because the bigger ones, they feed, that's where you're going to find your bigger predatory fish coming into that sort of thing. Now, where am I? Example, sorry, I'm just not only my go-tos and reading my notes at the same time to make sure I don't miss anything. So, like I said, the sandbar causes the waves to rise until it can no longer basically support itself, causes the breakdown, and then lose its remaining energy, and it washes over your bar, and it doesn't really form generally into your gutter or your trough in the deeper parts. So you'll see very little to no cresting when it goes over this, after it goes over your sandbar, and that tells you whether it's a steep or a slow drop off, is that wave action. So your smaller non-cresting waves, they don't reform after your sandbar. So that is a key indicator of a trough or also your cuts. So they can sort of tell if there's a gap. And we'll look at that when we touch on cuts. And your deeper area between the sandbar, that's also seen by your non-cresting wave. So it's good if the backside of your sandbar is within your casting distance, as that is the primary feeding zone. And it's the reason why it pushes your small bait fish up through that into the area between the back of it and the lip near the shore, where the fish run between the sandbar and the lip. So the size of those breaking waves, here's some more examples. So the size of your breaking waves means it's and the less energy for the smaller ones as they roll over and continue to crest. Okay, so it's still interacting with the bottom, although not. If it's not as high, may not be as deep enough, so it may not be as good, and the trough may not be as successful. So in this example here, this shows a few. So we've got some breaking waves that's spilling over here, and then you can see this area after that, which you can see there's no wave action or limited to no wave action straight after that area. So this area through there would be a nice little gutter that we'd look at. Here we can see how there's no real wave action coming through this little section through here, and there's a nice sort of deeper, no wave action and different colouring through this section right up until this point here. So this would actually be a nice place. I would aim to fish in this area here, where fish can come out from the ocean, come through this area. They can either go into this area where your gutter is, or through here where a nice hole would be, or the cut or entry point for your fish would be. And that's identified by the waves on either side of this structure. Here's another example where you can see breaking waves as they form and then crash off either side. So this is actually an example of a cut or an entry or exit point from a sandbar to a trough either side. It's great because it's right close to shore and it's within your casting distance. So you'd be aiming to look at fishing between these 2 points or either side of this area to have most success. Another example down the bottom, you can see all the wave action to either sides of this area here. This one's got it nicely pointed out, so you've got an entry point here, and that's identified by no wave action. No wave action. but your wave action is all across the top here, but it drops off, as you can see by the white wash here, drops off, and you have no wave action through this section. So that would be a nice little gutter in there, and then obviously smashing up onto the beach right here. So you're looking at these areas to fish in, or at your entry and exit points. More examples. It's always good to look at lots of little examples. Always good to look at many. So here you can see this photo's cropped about there. So you can see the whitewash here on either side of this particular picture, and then you have this really quiet section here, which is a deeper colour. There's no whitewash, there's no wave action, so that means there's a deep hole right there in comparison to what's on either side of it. Here we have some examples where there's a little rock formation here, but there's something interacting with the ocean here, causing these waves to break here. Then they back off before re-breaking here, and then they break and deeper section through here. So this picture would be telling me that there is a sandbar here that's causing this wave to rise in height and crash off. Slowly stops its interaction with the bottom before it reforms again across this area, and then drops off almost immediately. So you've got this deep section through here. So you can aim for the inner or the closest point to fish from would be in here. And you can tell from the wave action here and here that when they form up on the surface, these would be little dips in the sand. So the waves come up onto the surface and they sort of reform in here and they wash out this way. So that also shows you some of the contour of the beach itself by looking at the actual view here from the top, for example. So you could fish through this section here. I would say that this wouldn't be a bad one over here, or even section through here would be good too. And this one we've got, see some wave action all the way across the top here. This actually, you can see the sandbar. This would be sort of right there. But then you have this nice big open entry point for fish to come in, and there would be a gutter that's running out towards this direction. If there was more of the picture, I'd show you it keeps going that way. So you can see that it crashes on a sandbar, loses its energy pretty much straight away. So that means it drops off pretty quickly and then forms into a gutter or an entry point that goes in this way. So I'd be targeting this whole section through there. Okay, so as I mentioned, now we're going to have a look at gutters and troughs. So we're seeing what sandbars should look like based on the wave and the importance of a sandbar, and why they're important, i.e. that they create those waves. They can interact with the other side, which being gutter or trough, the height of the wave, so you can identify how deep or shallow it is, how much it drops off on the other side, whether or not it's a deep or a slow drop off. So whether your gutter is going to be too much of an effect, and identifying where they end and when they start again, as to whether you've got entry and exit. So gutter or trough, those are your real key elements that you're looking for, and that's what you're aiming to fish into. And the reason why we look at sandbars is because they hopefully will feed into a gutter or a trough, which is your primary feeding zone, and the deeper gutters are going to contain more fish. So that's why the wave height from the sandbar into the gutter, that's why that's important to try and note those, whether it drops off quickly or drops off slowly, whether the waves reform, whether they don't, whether they just stop altogether and then wait until they get to the shore and stop again. So all these combined allows the fish to come in and out of the gutter through those entry points, where the smaller fish they struggle with the current through that area, through the cut and the energy from the sandbar, and they feed into the deeper area. As you can see, this is a nice little example. You're foraging fish, hang around close to the sandbar. As the waves crash and feed into the deep gutter, you're going to have your bigger fish, and then you're going to have your predatory fish. So that's important. So we'll go through some more examples of them and to help get an idea not only of the depth of your gutters, but also just going through, I think I've covered that bit. Some more examples. So here's a perfect example of one where you can actually physically see with two groups of people standing. This is your sandbar. So somebody's actually out there standing on it, and you can see the dramatic difference between where the sandbar forms and when the trough drops. So this would be a gutter where it basically drops off very quickly. So as you can see, the waves will form straight away as it hits the steeper sandbar behind it, forming plunging breakers, comes across the sandbar to carry the nice food that the fish are looking for into this deep gutter that's created here, which, as you can see, has no way of action whatsoever. A great example of the difference in height that's created from a sandbar into a gutter. Here's another example of a sandbar with a gutter in front of it. You can see these perfect, nice, plunging big breakers that are crashing over. You can see these have actually spilled into each other. These ones are about to break and spill into each other, but they pretty much lose their energy straight away. And through this whole section through here, there is no wave action, there's no whitewash. So you can tell, plus with the colour, you can tell that this is going to be a deeper sand gutter. And this tiny section here is an example of what we call a lip, where there's a little drop off between the edge of the beach and where the waves then reform and crash onto the beach. So this whole section would be a great feeding ground to target as a fish patrol this zone. Here's a picture of the same beach, but done at two times, like two shots. So you can see the waves beginning to form on the sandbar out the back here. Then as they start to crest and spill into each other, the whole section becomes formed and they crash, and then through this section, through here and through there, you can see that there's little to no wave action. So that would mean that there's a nice drop off and there'd be a gutter that's nice and close to shore. So then all you need for this scenario, this picture, for this beach, would be for a perfect scenario is to have a cutter and entry either side of that to make this perfect. But that's a great example of a perfect gutter. So, I'm going to cuts and entries. So I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything on gutters before I move off, because they're the most important part. So it's obviously finalising, making sure we know from the height of the wave from the sandbar and the drop off that it drops off nice and quickly, like these. They drop off nice and quickly. It means it's deeper. No wave action afterwards. Means it's going to have a deeper and more successful chance. And that the fish they'll feed along the edges of the gutter where the water drops off into the crest, and the weight behind the actual breakers themselves close to shore is preferable as well. Okay, so cuts and entries, nice little diagram here. So these are your entry points into your gutters. Now, not all of them will have these. You might not always see them. They're not always the same size. They don't always look. And as the beach changes, because it never stays the same, they may get smaller, they may get larger, they may disappear altogether. So sand doesn't disappear, it just moves elsewhere. So a cut is where you've got an entry between, so two sandbars like this, allows fish to come in and out of that gutter that runs along here, so that it can feed on what comes through from the sandbar. And these are identified by the lack of wave action or breaking wave action, and you'll commonly find them. They're often also referred to as a rip or whereas swimmers, you need to be aware of them because they rip or they pull back right to sea, because the energy from the waves crashing come back in through this wave, so they cause a rip action as well. So they sometimes confused with that, but they can be seen through the waves as they come back out, like whitewash where they converge together, and they'll flow out. And at low tide, you might actually see a dipping in the floor, as well as sometimes you actually might even see a collection of, like this is shells or so forth, around this section of the beach, that indicates that as everything washes up, it collects around this section here, because that's where all the energy the waves break, and the energy takes all this stuff out. So anything that's pulled up from these surfaces be dragged across this way and then out. So you might find a collection of a lot of shells and a lot of crustacean stuff in this section of the beach at low tide. Oops, sorry, went too far. So here's some more examples of a few. So the cut itself is fed by water by either side of your sandbar and moves back out to the ocean. So it's great for targeting predatory fish. So if you're looking for tailor and so forth, you'll be looking for your cuts to try and aim to fish around those areas, because that's where they'll be coming in and out as they look for your smaller lake fish that are in this area or being disturbed by the sandbar, because they can't deal so much with the amount of current that's going through there. Now, as I mentioned, they're all different in size and strength, and combined together with your sandbar and your drop, they can give you your best conditions, but you're not always going to find them, and some are harder to see than others. This only is a diagram because it's written up, but it's clearly seen that you can see this is your normal beach. This will be at low or almost low tide, where you've got a sandbar that's clearly visible, and then you can see where there's the trough section at low tide that's visible. So high tide would be a perfect example to fish for, where you'd see then nice big cresting waves that drop off reasonably quickly after here, because you can see it the sandbar extends a little bit further off. If this dropped off nice and quickly here, that'd be even better, and you'd have a bigger and deeper trough. But that's a nice example of a small cut that comes through. Over here on this example, you can see you've got a lot of breaking waves through here and through here, but this section here, there is a lack of waves in that same vicinity. So just this section here, and this is at low tide as well, because you can see how there's a little bit of a sandbar, but also water sitting in this section through this area. So at high tide, when this all fills up, this would be your cut and entry point, and this would be a nice big this would be a little troughy gutter that you would try and fish along this section of the beach, but you'd aim for this thing here. So the more of these that you see, the more examples that you get of these will help you identify quicker and easier. It does take time, so these are your channels that allow the water to flow basically back out from your gutter into the ocean, and they can grow as the water moves through them, and they have to be deep enough basically to allow things to move out, and not cause the water to break. So you won't see a lot of wave action through there, or lesser wave action, no wave action. You can see it through. Sometimes they'll roll through it and then they'll break on the shore, and then the returning water will often look a bit like a rip as it comes out, where you see a lot of ripples or a lot of white sea foam moving backwards out to the sea. You can generally feel with your fishing line, it'll actually pull as it gets pulled out by the current. They can sometimes be confused with holes, but holes don't have gutters that feed into them. So that's the main difference between a hole. Here we have an example of a hole. These are often more fairly common to see in comparison to other structures where it needs a combination of things. Now, they can be seen, as I mentioned, beach, it's never going to be perfectly flat. You're going to have varying depths and high points. And as mentioned, low tide's great to be able to see these sort of things, because that's when a lot of the beach structures are exposed for you to view. High tide, now you're focusing on wave action to be able to identify them. So in this example, as you can see, you have wave action to the left and to the right of this hole, and you have no wave action that comes through the middle. And it's best observed when the wind and the tide are moving in the same direction. So you're not getting readings if the wind is blowing out to sea and the waves are coming in. You might get a misreading because it might create a different reaction to the water. But if it's a good big hole, then this is a clear example. The difference, obviously with the cut, as I mentioned, you're not going to have a gutter on either side. As you can see, there's not really a gutter here. There's not one here. So that's definitely an example of a hole. And if you can't find anything else, then this is where you'd want to look at. As I mentioned, if you're looking along the shore, you can look for a dip or a cove in the beach. I think there was an example earlier back. Here we go. We can see, so that's a dip, and that's a dip, and that's a high point, and that's a high point. So those are often indicators that there's stuff going on along those areas. So it's generally normally totally flat, and easier spot with little to no wave action. Like here we go, there's a couple other more examples where here we have breaking waves either side, but a big clear section in the middle here where you've got no wave action whatsoever. So that would be a nice deep hole to fish on. And as mentioned, there's not really any gutter to the left or the right of this, and there's waves breaking here. So I would aim to fish in that, obviously in this area where it's pointed out. Another example of another hole, wave action to both the left and the right of a deep section. So this and then feeds out to the sea. So this would be where they might congregate. So they're going to look for those deeper areas to feed from. So I think that pretty much covers up on the holes. So they're very common on the beach, indicated by those dips in the water, the lack of the wave action altogether. They're not a cut because they don't have gutters or sandbars feeding into them. Not as ideal as having a gutter with a cut either side, but it's better than fishing nothing. Next one, we're going to have a quick squeeze out. Is what we call submerged points, often combined with a hole. And in the video at the end, there's actually kind of an example of what I meant by where there's in the video, I'll point it out, where there's a difference in height that creates sort of a ripple action on the water. But these ones, they're not uncommon to see next to a hole. They generally form to the same side of it, and it's where the bottom contour is low enough to cause the water rise to form a breaking wave, and they'll roll in either side. So it generally comes in that you'll have as you said, this one is your depth noted out on an example. So you're going to have a breaking wave that happens out here. So it's going to start nice and big before it starts to spill over, and then create into a plunging wave here. Whereas you're going to have your spilling waves, and then your wash from your hole is going to happen here. So there's going to be nothing really happening here, but then you're going to see nice big breaking waves that come across. They start big, like short breaking waves out here, and they'll grow as they come through this section, and then they'll wash out in this section, and you'll see them as they identify. So they'll roll in either side, and the reason why these are important is that fish can drive your baits up against. So in the hole, your predatory fish will drive the bait fish up against this area here, because there is a lot of disturbance and turbulence that happens in this section. So you'll often see ripples and so forth, a lot of wash that happens as these two areas interact with each other. And you can observe them at low tide, but at high tide, I'll show you another example a bit further on. So this is a great place to fish. So if you're fishing a hole, fish close to your point to help you get the best chance of success from them. As remember, water always follows the least path of resistance, and I'll move towards the deeper section of hole before following the bottom contour of the water back out. And so this causes actions that can help us find those deeper, bigger holes, and also helps us identify what's going on around that section. This will also mean that, as before, you'll often find your rocks and broken shells around this section, the dip of the cove, at high tide mark, as the waves and currents make that sort of impact, and it helps you get a good idea of what's going on underneath. So I covered that off. So just checking, I'm making sure I'm going through everything. So what's on my next one? So there's not much more to cover. I've really gone a bit quicker than I thought I would, so I might have missed a few things. So if I did, I apologise, and I might come back at some point. And I might give another example of this at a bit of a later stage as well, to help identify these. So as mentioned, they're not all structures aren't created equal, and they often change over time. And your sandbar might not go away, but it does move. It can move. It just doesn't. Sand doesn't stay the same. Conditions often will affect things. And here's a beach where there's nothing but here is the only example of the only sandbar in the region, and you can tell that by the type of wave action. So this is the only big stretch of beach you can find that you're going to fish on. I'd fish just in front of that. That's going to be the only example. Here is one where an example where I mentioned how you might get a stretch of beach where there's nothing. This is what a stretch of beach with nothing looks like, where you've got nothing going on and then just waves crashing up onto the bottom. So this is what a flat beach bottom looks like. So this is not ideal for fishing. I wouldn't just bunk up and fish here, because you're going to have a really low chance of catching something. So the best chance is to look for a structure of any sort and aim to fish from that. So if that means fishing in front of this one, then that's fine. If it means fishing here or here, I'd do that. Or here, go for those ones. If you can get a perfect example like these or this, even better.
If you can find one where you have, like this, where you have a perfect example of entry and exit point, nice gutter in between, and this is at low tide, then that's even better. Another one where you've got your one with the entry and your gutter, then great. But you're not always going to see that, so target your features the best way you can. Here's some more examples of to help illustrate the point. Here we've got a little hole where there's some wave action out the side. Either side, the waves continue to interact with the bottom contours, but in the middle section, there's no interaction. Here we have an example of why I'm saying the sandbar changes the swell. So as your water comes in, the lack of depth between the bottom and the top causes the wave to form and break. And then as it goes into your gutter, it becomes flatter because of the fact there's deeper water. It is deeper water, and there's no way the waves can interact with the bottom. So they flatten out before obviously recresting and crashing into the shoreline. So you would fish this section, okay, between the two gutters, and if you can get them closer to shore, it's great. It's even better. Here's an example, obviously, of a hole I've used before. This would be a sandbar. This is the shore, and there's a section in the middle that's deep, and that's going to be one where you look for fishing off. Here we go. Now this is a video I took the other day. This is a good example out. I'm pushing it too far, but you can see here. Look at all these are nice big breaking waves that are forming and crashing. You can see a nice big one up the back there that's formed, and it crashes. You can see it all forming as it goes along, crash, 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 and they lose their energy pretty quick. I just got a camera, but at the end there it stops. So you see all this section here is all consistent. And then there's this nice little soft bit. You can see actually a lot of the whitewash going this way. So this is your entry and exit point over there. This is the section through the middle where you've got no wave action happening until it hits this little lip here on the surface where they crash back into. So we were fishing this sort of action in the middle here, and that's where we're targeting. The gentleman caught the tailor was targeting around where that entry and exit point were over the top here, and the reef section is just over here on end here, and that's shown by that thing. Sorry, my camera was moving around quick. I didn't expect to narrate this so long. So as we wait for that sort of waves to form, you can see them building and then crashing. There we go, the whole section crashes. And that's the other side of that sandbar or the reef that I mentioned. So you've got a good example where they're crashing to the left and to the right. You get nice big plunging waves, crash, and then they totally lose their energy through this section. So you know that's going to be a deep section of water. So that's hopefully gives you guys a little bit more of an idea of what we're looking at when we're looking at beach structures, and hopefully that's been of some use. Any questions, obviously add them into the comments. Hopefully I haven't missed anything important that I've noted down. I had to go through that. I was trying to do it as quick as I could without making it too complex. It does take a little bit of time to look and identify them on the beach, but the more examples you see and the more you experience, the better. This should be a perfect if that wave action was a little bit closer to the shore, and then this section here was deeper. So, a cast as far, but it's not always perfect, not always ideal, but this is a good example of what you'd like to see. So hopefully that's it, and hopefully that was of some help to you guys. Until next time, that's me.